Oh, hey, how y'all doing? It's I didn't hear you come up. Well, welcome. Have a sit. I'm just sitting here reading some really cool stories. Uh, would you like to hear one? That sounds fantastic. All right. Well, if you don't know me, uh, most of my students call me Mr. Scott. I'm the school resource officer at Hot Springs Elementary School. And as my students may tell you, I love a good story. And I've written a few, and I try to encourage my students there that I work with and try to write a few too. And I love telling stories in wild tales. Now, when it comes to wild tales, when I think of wild tales, I think of Jack. Who's Jack? Well, he's not one of my students, but I've got a few that are very similar to Jack. Jack, there's a group of stories called Jack Tales that were written down in the 1940s, and they were or are based on and created from oral stories from the Appalachian Mountains, Tennessee, North Carolina, Kentucky, Virginia, and they were handed down by word of mouth. And a gentleman in the 1940s, 1945, decided to take these stories that he grew up with and wrote them down. And when I was growing up, my teachers in school would read me Jack Tales, and I was fascinated by them. So, how would you like to hear a Jack Tale? This is one of my favorites. Jack and the Giant's New Ground. One time, way back years ago, there was a boy named Jack. He and his folks lived off the mountains somewhere, and they were awful poor, just didn't have a thing really to speak of. Now, Jack had two brothers, Will and Tom, and they're in some of the Jack Tales, but this one I'm fixing to tell you about, there's mostly just Jack in it. Jack was an awful lazy person sometimes. Hope that doesn't sound familiar. Just wouldn't do a lick of work. His mother and his daddy kept trying to get him to help around the farm, but they couldn't do a thing with him when he took a lazy spell. Well, Jack decided one day he'd pull out from there and try his luck at some other section of the country. So his mother fixed him up a little snack at dinner, and he put on his old raggedy hat and lit out. Jack walked on, and he walked on and walked on. He ate his snack before he had gone too terribly far, and the sun commenced to just a beating down and getting awful hot. He traveled on and traveled on till he was plumb out of his settlement that he had knew and grew up in. It got to be about 12 o'clock noon, sun just a beating down from the high, and Jack started getting hungry again. Now he came to a fine, smooth road directly. Decided he'd take that and see where it went. Find out what kind of folks lived down there. And he went on this new road and went on and went on and traveled on. Jack stopped at a big, fine stone house up above the road. Now, Jack, he had never seen such a big house as that as before in his life. And he stopped and stared at it for a little bit. Then he looked at the gate and saw that the gate to the house was solid gold. Well, Jack allowed some well-doing folks must live there, and he wondered whether or not they could give him some dinner. So he stepped back from the gate and hollered out, "Hello!" A man came to the door and says, "Hello, stranger. What do you have?" Well, Jack stepped back a second and he said, "Well, I'm a-looking for a job of work." Man said, "I don't know as I need to hire anybody right now. What's your name?" "Name's Jack." "Come on up, Jack, and sit a spell. Ain't it pretty hot out there walking?" "Pretty hot," says Jack. "Well, come on up on the porch and cool off. You're not in such a big hurry, are you?" Well, Jack says, "Well, I'll stop a little bit, I reckon." Well, he shoved back that gold gate and marched on in. The man reached in his door at the house and pulled out a couple of chairs, and Jack took one of them and leaned back and commenced whittling with his pocket knife. Directly, Jack says to the man, "What'd you say your name was, mister?" The man looked at it and says, "Why, Jack, I'm the king." "Well now, king," says Jack, "it looks like you'd be a-needing somebody with all your land, and I bet you got a heap of land to work. Are you a hard worker, Jack?" "Oh, I'm the workingest one of them all back home," Jack says. "You got a good hand to plow?" "Yes, sir." "Can you clear new ground, Jack?" "Why, that's all I ever done back home," Jack told him. "Can you kill giants?" "Huh?" And Jack dropped his pocket knife, reached down and picked it up and says, "Well, I reckon I could try." The old king sort of looked at Jack and how little he was, and he says, "Well now, Jack, I have got a little piece of new ground I've been trying for the longest to get cleared. Trouble is, there's a gang of giants live over in the next holler and been disputing with me about the claim on that land. They even kill every Englishman that goes up there, kills them and eats them. And I reckon I've done hired about a dozen men claim to be giant killers and land cleaners, but the giants killed them every last one." "Are these giants very big uns?" says Jack. "Well, they're all about 6 times the size of a normal man," said the king, "and there's 5 of them. The old man got 4 heads, and his old woman's got 2. Their oldest boy's got 2 heads, and there's a set of twins that got 3 heads apiece." Now, Jack didn't say nothing, just kept studying about how hungry he actually was. The king says, "Think you can clear that patch, Jack?" Jack didn't even hesitate. "Why, sure," says Jack. "All I can do is get killed or kill them one." "All right, son. We'll make arrangements about the work after we eat. I suspect my old woman's got dinner about ready. Let's go on into the table." "Thank you, king," says Jack. "I hope it won't put you out none." "Why, no," says the king. "It ain't much, but you're welcome what we got." Well, Jack ate about all the dinner he could hold, but the king's old woman kept on piling up his plate till he was plumb floundered. His dish sat there stacked up with chicken and cornbread and beans and greens and pies and cakes, and the queen had done poured him milk for the 3rd time. The old king kept right on eating. Jack didn't want them to think he couldn't eat as much as anybody else, so directly he reached down and took hold of the old leather apron he had on and doubled that up underneath his coat. Then he'd make like he was taking a bite, but he'd slip it down into that leather apron. He poured about 4 glasses of milk down there too. Had to fasten his belt down real hard so it'd hold it all. Well, directly, the king pushed his chair back, and then he and Jack went out, sat down again, leaned back, and started whittling. King says to Jack, "If you get that patch clear, Jack, I'll pay you $1,000 apiece for them giant heads, for every one you bring down, and pay you good wages for getting that patch cleared. 10 cents a month, 10 cents an hour." Now, 10 cents an hour may not sound like much, but back then that was a lot of money. Now, Jack said that suited him all right, and he got the king to point him out which ridge it was. Then Jack says to the king, "You say them giants live over there in the other holler?" The king said they did. Jack says, "Can they hear you when you start a-hacking?" Well, the king says they sure can. Well, Jack didn't say nothing but studied for a few seconds. The king says to him, "You don't feel uneasy now, do you, Jack?" "Why, no, bedads," says Jack. Bedads was an old saying that they used to say back then. "Why, I may be the very giant killer you've been looking for. I may not kill all of them today, but I'll try to get a start on them anyhow." So the king told him maybe he'd better get on to work. Said for him to go out past the wood pile and grab him an axe. Says you might get in a lick or two before them giants come. You'll find a tree up there where them other men have knocked a couple of chips out of it. You can start on that same tree. So Jack started on out to the woodpile, and the king watched him, saw him lean over and pick up a little Tommy hatchet. "Hey, Jack, you'll need that axe, won't you?" "Why, no," says Jack. "This here will be all right." He started off and turned around and says, "I'll be back about in time for supper." The old king just grinned and let him go on. Well, Jack finally got up on that ridge, and he was scared to death, let me tell you. He sat down on a log and studied for a while. He knowed if he'd started cutting, them giants would come up there, and he knowed if he didn't, the king had told him he hadn't come back, there'd be no work, and he wouldn't get no supper. That seemed to bother Jack more than anything. So Jack thought about it some more. Then he picked out the tallest poplar tree up there that he could find, and he done climbed up it. Started chopping on the limbs way up at the very top of the tree. Hack, hack, hack! Jack beat on that tree and cutting the limbs off of it with that little hatchet. Roundabout a ways, he heard a racket directly back behind him, sounding like a horse coming up through the brush. Jack looked down the holler and saw a man about 30 foot high come a-stomping up the mountain, stepping right over the laurel bushes and the rock cliffs, and Jack was so scared he'd like to slip a hold of that tree. The old giant came up on top to the where Jack was at, looked around till he finally saw where Jack was sitting. Came over there underneath him, looked up and says, "Hello, stranger." Jack says, "Howdy do, Daddy." "What in the world you doing up there?" says the giant. "Well, I'm a clearing new ground for that man lives back down yonder." "Clearing land? Well, I've never seen such a fool business. Starting clearing new ground in the top of a tree? Ain't you got no sense? Why, that's always the way we started clearing back home. What's your name, son?" "My name's Jack." "Well, look-a here, Jack. This patch of land is ours, and we don't aim to have it cleared. We done told the king so." "Well," says Jack, "I didn't know that. And if I'd have known it, I'd not have started." "Well, come on down here, Jack, and I'll take you home for supper." Well, he didn't think Jack knew what he meant by that, but Jack hollered back and says, "All right, Daddy, I'll be right down." Jack clumb down a ways till he got about even with the old giant's head, and he started talking to him. He says, "Daddy, they tell me giants are awful stout. Is that so?" "Why, some are," says the giant. "Myself, I can carry 1,000 men before me." "Well, now, Daddy, I bet I can do something you can't do." "What's that, Jack?" said the giant with a puzzled expression. "Squeeze milk out of a flint rock." "I don't believe you." "Well, you throw me up a flint rock up here and I'll show you." So while the old giant hunted him a flint rock along the ground in that holler, Jack took his knife and punched a little hole in that old leather apron. The giant chucked that rock up to him, and Jack squeezed down on it real hard, pushed it up against his apron, and the milk commenced to shoot out of that apron. "Do it again, Jack," said the giant, totally mystified. So Jack pushed his hand right hard that time, and the hit just went out like a cow milk. The old giant hollered up to Jack and says, "Hey, I can do that. Throw me down that rock." He took the rock, Jack dropped to him, and he squeezed and squeezed till finally he got so mad he smashed down on it, and then they tell me he crumbled it up like a flint rock and turned it right into powder. Then Jack hollered down to him and says, "Hey, Daddy, I can do something else you can't do." "What's that, Jack?" said the giant, still a little ticked off about the whole thing. "I can cut myself wide open and sew it right back up, and it won't hurt me none." "Ah, shucks, Jack, now I know you're lying. You want to see me do it?" "Yeah, go ahead," said the giant. Jack took his knife and ripped open that apron, took a piece of string he had, punched some holes, and sewed it right back up. Looked at the giant and said, "See, Daddy, just as good as I ever was." Well, the old giant just knew he couldn't be bested. He couldn't stand to let Jack outdo him, so he hollered up and said, "Hand me down that there knife, Jack." Well, he took Jack's knife and cut himself wide open, staggered around a little, and finally queered over onto the ground dead. Well, Jack scaled down that tree and cut off the old giant's head with his little hatchet and took him on back down to the king's house. The king paid Jack $2,000 like he said he would. Jack ate him a big supper and stayed the night. Next morning, after he ate his breakfast, Jack told the king he reckoned he'd have to be getting on back home. Said his daddy would be needing him to set out to tobacco. But the king says, "Oh no, Jack, why you're the best giant killer I ever hired. There's some more of that giant gang yet, and I'd like awful well if you could go up and get shed of all of them." Jack didn't want to go. He figured he had done made himself enough money to last him for a little while, and he didn't want to get mixed up with them giants any more than he could help to. But the king kept on after him until Jack saw he couldn't get out of it. And so he went up, got the Tommy hatchet, and started back up to the new ground again. Jack hadn't hardly got up there that time before he heard something coming up the holler, stomping and breaking brush and making the awfulest racket. He started climbing a tree like he had done before, but the racket was getting closer and closer, faster than he had thought it would be. Jack looked up and saw it was them twin giants that had 3 heads. So that's a total of 6. 6 heads on them two giants. Jack looked up and saw them 6 heads coming from over the treetops, and he says, "Law me, I can't stand that. I gotta hide." He saw him a big holler log down the hills away, grabbed him up a shirt tail full of rocks, and shot in that log like a ground squirrel. It was pretty big inside. It was a good-sized chestnut tree. Jack could turn right around in it. The old giants finally got up there. Jack heard one of them say to the other, "Oh, Law, look at yonder. Someone's done killed brother." "Law, yes. Now who you reckon could have done that?" "Why, he could carry 1,000 Englishmen before him, single-handedly." "I didn't hear no racket up here yesterday, did you?" The other giant shook his head and said, "Why, no. And the ground ain't trampled over it neither. Who in the world do you reckon could have done this?" Well, they mourned over him a while, and then they had to take him on down and fix up a burying. So they got a hold of him, one by the hands and one by the feet, and they started down the mountain. "Poor brother," says one of them. "If we'd have known who it was that killed him, we'd sure fix them." The other stopped all at once and says, "Hold on a minute. There ain't a stick of wood at the house. Mom sent us up here after wood. We sure better not forget about that. We'll have to have plenty of wood too, sitting up all night with brother." "Well, better get about the handiest thing we could find," said the other giant. "Look yonder at that holler log. Suppose we take that. This is the log that Jack was hiding in." Well, they laid the old dead giant down across the top of the log and shouldered it right up, and Jack got shook around right considerable inside that log, but after a while he did get settled down and was enjoying the ride, bouncing around inside that hollow log. He looked and saw the old giant in front of him had the log resting on its shoulders, and Jack directly happened to recollect that he had all them rocks in his shirt pockets. So after he had gone down the holler piece, Jack picked one of them rocks up, and he chunked it right at the giant in front of him. Flumped him right in the back of the head. The old giant stumbled and stopped and hollered back at his brother and saying, "You look here. What are you throwing rocks at me for?" The other giant, being puzzled, says, "I never threw no rocks at you." "You did so. You nearly knocked me down." "Why, I never done it," said his brother. They argued for a while, finally started on down the hill again. Jack waited a minute or two, then he cut loose with another good-sized rock. Wham! In the back of the head again. "You're the very one. You need to try to lie your way out of it. You can see as good as I can. There ain't nobody else around here to throw no rocks. You just hit me the other time now, one more time, and I'll come back there and smack the fire out of you." They jawed and cussed a right smart while till finally they quit and started on down the mountain again. Now this time, Jack picked out one of the rocks that had the sharpest edges on it. He drew back and flung that rock and clipped the old giant right in the same place on the back of the head. Pow! The old giant in front hollered out so loud you probably could have heard him 5 miles away. He throwed that log off on his shoulder and just made for the other one, saying, "That makes 3 times you done rocked me. And you'll just take a beating from me now, or I'll..." "And you'll just take a beating from me now, or no, I can't do it." Them twin giants started into fighting like horses kicking. They beat and fight ever since, punching and biting and kicking and mauling one another, made a noise like splitting rails. They fit and scratched and fit till they couldn't stand up no more. Got to tumbling around on the ground, knocking down trees and kicking up rocks and dirt, and they were clinched so tight together neither one of them could finally break loose from the other. And directly they were so worn out, they just lay there all tangled up in a pile, both of them panting for breath. So when Jack saw there wasn't no danger in them, he crawled out from under that log and chopped off their heads. Now remember how many heads they had? Each giant of the twins had 3 heads, so he had a total of 6 heads, and he had to carry down the mountain. So he put them in a sack and pulled off down towards the king's house. Well, the old king paid Jack $6,000 for that load of heads. Then Jack said he just had to get on home. Now, said his folks were being easy about him, and besides, that they couldn't get any work done on the property unless he was there. But the king says to him, he says, "Why, Jack, there ain't but 2 more of them now. You kill them for me, and that'll wind them all up. Then we won't have no trouble at all about the new ground." Jack said he'd see what he could do. He went on back that same evening. This time Jack didn't climb no tree or nothing. Went to work making a fresh pile. Made all the racket he could. The old 4-headed giant came a tearing up there in no time at all. Looked around and saw the other giants, his boys, laying there dead. Came over to where Jack was and says, looking down, "Hello, stranger." Jack looks up. "Hello yourself. What's your name, buddy?" "My name's Jack. Mr. Jack." "Well, Mr. Jack, can you tell me how come all my boys here are laying dead?" "Well, yes, Dad, I can tell you," says Jack. "They came up here cussing and bussing me, and I had to haul off and kill them. You just try and sass me every bit now, and I'll have to kill you too." "Oh, pray, Jack, don't do that. There's only me and the old woman left now. She's got to have somebody to get in her stove wood and tote up her water." "Well, you'd better be careful," says Jack, "what you say. I ain't going to take nothing off of nobody." "Well, now, Jack, I don't want to have no racket with you. Mr. Jack, you come on down and stay with the night with us, and we'll set up with our dead folks, and we'll get fixed to have a burying tomorrow." Well, Jack's puzzled for a minute, scratched his head and said, "Well, you better watch out what you say. I'll go, but you better watch what you say." "Oh, I'll not say nothing," says the old giant. He says, "Law, Jack, you must be the awfulest, meanest man." Well, so the old giant struck his dead youngins underneath his arm, and he started with Jack on down the mountain. When they got close to home, the giant stopped and says to Jack, "Now, Jack, you better wait here till I go and tell the old lady you've come down for supper. She might cut a bit of a shine. She'll be mad enough already about her boys being killed." He went on in and shut the door. Now Jack, being Jack, slipped up and laid his ear to the keyhole so he could hear what was going on. Heard him tell his old lady, "I've got Jack here, claims to be a giant killer. I found the boys up yonder at the new ground with their heads cut off, and this here Jack says he's the one that done it." And the old woman, the boy's mother, carried on, and finally the old giant got her hushed up and calmed down and says, "He don't look to me like he's so stout as all that. We'll have to test him out a little and see whether he's as bad as he claims he is." Well, directly Jack heard him coming to the door, and he was rattling a bunch of buckets. So Jack stepped up back from the house and made like he was just now coming up. The old giant came out and says, "There ain't a bit of water up, Jack. The old woman wants you and me to tote her some back from the creek." Well, Jack saw the giant had 4 big buckets as big as wash tubs and had rope for handles. And he had slung them all on one of his arms. So they went on down to the creek, and the old giant set the buckets down and put them into the creek and pulled them up full of water. Jack knowed he couldn't even tip one of them big buckets over, and it being empty. So he left his 2 buckets just a-laying there. He waded out in the creek and started rolling up his sleeves. The old giant was heading back to the house, looked back, stopped, saw Jack spit in his hands, and started feeling around in the water. "What in the world you fixing to do, Jack?" "Well, Daddy," says Jack, "just as soon as I can find a place to catch a hold, I'm going to take this here creek back up there closer to the house where your old woman can get her water at any time she wants to." "Oh, no, Jack. Don't take that creek back. It'll ruin my cornfields, and besides that, my old lady's getting a sort of shaky on her feet, and she might fall in and get drowned." "Well, then," Jack says, "I can't be a-wasting my time taking little buckets like that back up to the hill. Why, I'd not want to be seen toting such little buckets as them." "Well, I'll tell you what, Jack, just leave them here," said the giant. "Come on, let's go on back to the house. Mind you now, you come over here and leave that creek where it be, okay?" Well, when they got back, he told his old woman what Jack had said. Says, "Why, law me, I had a time getting him to leave that creek alone." He came back out again, saw Jack, and told Jack supper wasn't quite ready yet. Said for him to come on, and they'd play pitch crowbar till it was time to eat. They went on down to the level field down below the house, and the old giant picked up a crowbar from the fence corner. It must have weighed 1,000 pounds. Big crowbar. And he says, "Now, Jack, we'll see who can pitch this crowbar the furthest. That's a game me and the boys used to play." So he heaved up and pitched it about 100 yards. Says, "Now you run get it, Jack. See can you pitch it back here to me while I'm standing here." Well, Jack ran to where it fell, reached down, took hold of it, paused for a second, looked up way past the giant, put his hand over his mouth and hollers out, "Hey, Uncle! Hey, Uncle!" The old giant looked around and says, "What you calling me Uncle for?" "Well, I ain't calling you Uncle." "Hey, Uncle! Hey, Uncle!" "Who you hollering at, Jack?" said the daddy giant. "Why, I got an uncle over in Virginia," says Jack. "He's a blacksmith, and this old crowbar would be the very thing for him to make up into horseshoes. Iron's mighty scarce over there right now, and I thought I'd just pitch it out over there to him." And he calls out again, "Hey, Uncle!" "Oh, no, Jack," said the giant. "I need that there crowbar. Pray don't pitch it over into Virginia." "Well, now," says Jack, "I can't be bothered with pitching it just back to where you're at. If I can't pitch it where I want to, I'll not pitch it at all." "Well, I'll leave it laying there then, Jack. Come on, let's go back to the house. Your turn loose of my crowbar right now." And they got back. The old giant went in and told his old woman he couldn't find out nothing about Jack. Said for her to test him a while. He says, "I'll go get some more firewood. You see can you get him in that oven till I get back so we can eat." Well, he went out back and says to Jack, I got to go get a turn of wood. Jack, you go on in the house and get ready for supper." So Jack went on in, looked around, didn't see a thing cooking. And there was a big old-fashioned clay oven with red coals all across it. And the lid to the stove lying down beside them on the ground. The old giant lady come at him, had a wash rag in one hand and a comb in the other, and says, "Come on now, Jackie, let me wash your hair and comb you for supper." "Well, there's no need to bother," said Jack, putting his hands up. "I can wash myself." "Ah, Jack, I always did this for my own boys before supper. I just want to treat you like I treat my boys." "Thank you, ma'am, but I generally wash and comb myself." "Ah, please," the old lady said. "You just let me wash you a little now and comb your head. Come on now, Jackie, sit up here on this here shelf so I won't have to stoop over none." Now Jack looked and saw the shelf was right on the side of the big dirt oven. And he thought a minute, then he climbed right back up there onto that shelf, and it was rocking and reeling and just kind of tittering back and forth. And The old woman kept trying to get him with the rag and the comb, but Jack kept on teetering around until he finally slipped off on the wrong side. He climbed back up and he rocked and reeled some more, and the old woman told him, "Sit straight, Jack. Lean over this way a little bit. Sakes alive, don't you know how to sit up on a shelf?" Well, Jack says, "I never tried sitting on such a thing before." "I don't know what you mean." "Well, you get down here a minute and I reckon I'll have to show you." She started to climb up there on the shelf herself. "You put your shoulder under it, Jack, and I'm mightily heavy, and I'm liable to break it." So Jack put his shoulder under the far end, and when the old woman went to turn around and sit, Jack shoved up right quick, fetched the shelf, and smacked her in the rear, clopped her right upside, and flipped her into the oven. He pulled up a handspike and put the lid on, and rammed that handspike right in there to seal it up good. Then he went and hid behind the door. Now, indirectly, the old giant came in, heard something in the oven, just a crackling and a popping, and he says, "Hey, old woman," looking around. "Hey, old woman, Jack's a-burning." So when she didn't answer, the old giant finally lifted the lid off the stove, and there was his old lady, about baked done. "Well, I'll be confounded. That's not Jack," said the old giant. Jack stepped out from behind the door and says, "No, it sure ain't, and you better mind out, or I'll put you in there too." "Oh, pray, Jack, don't put me in there. You done got us licked. Jack, I'm the only one left now, and I reckon I better just leave the country for good. Now you help me out of here, Jack, and I'll go off somewhere to some other place, and I promise not to come back here no more." "Well, I'd surely like to help you, Daddy," says Jack, "but I don't think we got the time now. It's a bit too late." "Too late? How come, Jack?" "Well, the king told me he was going to send an army of 2,000 men down here to kill you this very day. They ought to be here just about any minute." 2,000, said the giant. "That many will kill me, sure. Law, what am I done to do, Jack? Pray, Jack, hide me somewhere." Well, Jack saw a big chest there in the house and told the old giant to jump in it. Tommy got in, and Jack fastened the lid down on the top of the chest. Jack Jack then ran to the window and made it out like there was an army a-coming down the holler. He says, "Yonder they come, Daddy. Looks to me like there are about 3,000 of them. I'll try to keep them off you, though. You keep right still, and I'll do my best not to let them get at you." Well, Jack ran outside and commenced to making a terrible racket, banging on the side of the house, banging on the walls with sticks, rattling the windows, shouting and hollering and making out like he was a whole army of 3,000 people. Finally, he ran back into the house, knocked over the table and 2 or 3 chairs, and says, "Yo, you quit that right now and get on out of here. I done killed that old giant. No use in you coming and breaking up them chairs. He ain't here, I tell you." Then Jack had tumbled over some more chairs and threw some dishes around considerably and says, "You leave all them things alone now, before I have to knock some of you down myself." Then he'd run by that chest and beat on it and holler out, "He ain't in there. Y'all leave that chest alone. He's dead, just like I told you. Now you men march right back up to the king and tell him I done got shed of that giant, and there ain't nary a one of them left." Well, Jack finally made like he'd run off the entire army, and he let the old giant out of the chest. And the old giant, he was just a-shaking and says, "Jack, I surely do thank you for not letting all them men find out where I was at." So Jack took the old giant down to the train depot, put him on a freight train, and they hauled him off to China. The king paid Jack $2,000 for baking the old woman, but he said he couldn't allow him nothing on the old giant because the trade had actually been made that Jack was to bring him the heads. Well, Jack didn't care none because his overall pockets were just a-bulging with money. When he got back home, he didn't have to clear that new ground after all for the king. He paid his 2 brothers, Will and Tom, to do it for him. And the last time I went down that way to see Jack, he was doing right well for himself. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I'm going to try to have some more stories for you. A few more Jack tales, maybe some other stories, and maybe some spooky stories from a book I wrote. I'll read those to you. So in the meantime, don't forget, you guys wash your hands, be nice to each other, and I'll talk to y'all later.